Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast this week is Andy Morrison. Now, Andy is an ex-professional footballer, legendary captain of Manchester City. He's played for our rivals down the road, Blackburn Rovers, Plymouth, Blackpool, Huddersfield, and entered into the world of football management. Andy, it's absolutely brilliant to get you on the Godcast. How are you doing?
I'm good, Alex. Thank you. Great.
Where's home for you, Andy? You're a well-travelled guy.
Yeah,
Where's
I'm in.
base?
I'm in just outside Northwich, over in Cheshire. So we've been settled here now for best part of 23 years. So quite happy.
Yeah. Andy, I was looking at your kind of resume. That's some CV you've got, isn't it? It's
Very,
it's
very, very.
it's quite extensive. And I thought, well, where do I start with? So I'm actually going to start in the most recent. How does somebody such as yourself has a CV that goes kind of Connah's key football manager to manager in the Sri Lankan national side? How did that come about?
Well, it was an opportunity that came about from relationship with Tim Cahill, who is working in at Qatar Aspire, and it was an idea really to leave a legacy after the World Cup of helping the nations at the lower regions. We all know Italy, Germany, we all know England, Spain, these teams at the top end, but there's also a pecking order, and there's a lot of teams like down below 200. So it was to try and develop them countries, improve their infrastructure, and ultimately help them to win games of football.
Where are Sri Lanka, Andy, in the pecking order? What is the?
Well, they're as low as it can be.
Yeah.
There were 207 out of about 210, and I don't think the other three really have any teams that are working. So we are right at the, we're right at the very bottom at this moment in time, and it's probably a country that has struggled for many decades now to actually develop grassroots football, to create a pathway to the national team, and hopefully in years to come that'll be in place.
So does that mean that you get involved in the grassroots stuff as well as the older guys, or?
No, I mean I'm there I'm there as a national team manager, but I'm there in many capacities really to to help to create the vision of where we want to go, and and hopefully my whatever qualities I have they'll use to to help develop that young, because we don't have a domestic league at the minute, which is working to actually produce, it's been probably the best part of 15 months since they had any domestic football. So it's very, very difficult to create a pathway for the national team to be able to compete at any sort of level. But that's something there's plannings in place for that, and we hope we'll start to see the growth maybe sooner rather than later.
Have you got some lads with potential? Is the standard half decent, or is it really?
It's limited because of as I said, there's a struggle they've had now for a long period of time to actually develop football, and get the structure from, like I say, grassroots all the way through, and the pathway to the national team. And there are players that are worldwide, that do carry Sri Lankan passports, and and they have a connection with the country through family, and we've seen a lot of them, and there's some very talented players. That's something that will come further down the line, when we start to scout them and recruit them. But for now, we're basically just trying to get started and going again. Things are difficult at the moment. There's a suspension from FIFA on Sri Lanka football, because the last election wasn't done correctly, as is the protocol for a FIFA selected committee within a country, and I don't think that was done correctly. So there's been it's obviously sanctions. They're suspended at the moment, and we're hoping to have that lifted in the coming weeks so that we can then go back out and start this journey.
Is it a job that's exciting? Is it kind of got the juices flowing? Or?
Yeah, 100%, Alex. It felt right at the time where I was in my life and where I wanted to go. I'd had 6 or 7 years of incredible success, culminating in winning the titles in Wales and manager of the season back to back. And I needed a change. I needed a challenge, something, where I felt I was meant to be, and this was perfect. Whether that goes on to be how I visualized it and what I was hoping for, only time will tell. That's in the lap of the Lords. But at the minute, my heart wants to get back out there and work. And I feel it's my purpose, but life doesn't always work that way.
And talking about Welsh football, Andy, you managed Connah's Quay for 6 years, I think you said, and when you took them over, they were in a club not too dissimilar to perhaps Sri Lanka in terms of they were really struggling, weren't they? I was wondering what your approach to that was. And just in talking from somebody who worked for Argos as a manager, I'm wondering if the management techniques of a store manager like myself are similar to that of a football manager. What was the starting point for you going in there?
We were bottom of the league in the Welsh Premier League, and but there was a lot of good things in place. There was an ambitious chairman, which is always a big plus, who had a vision of where he wanted to go. There was good players, there was good coaches there. There was an infrastructure being built to really develop and go on and do what we did eventually. And from day one, I know it's old cliches and that, but I basically had one day, and then I started training the players, and I worked and focused on that one day, got into one game, and then before you know it, you're into 6 to 8 games, and then before you know it, you're starting to make an impression. We were winning games of football, and it grows from there. Of course there is. In your mind's eye, you always have a vision of where you want to go, but everything is in the day. Everything is giving your attention to the moment and what you're doing in front of you, and then things follow on from that.
Yeah. And just for people who are less familiar with Welsh football, was the club full time at this point? Was it semi-pro? What was the setup?
Well, it was semi-pro at that point, and part-time players that were working and coming in, and we managed to get into Europe on the first year I was there, which was a catalyst really to kick us on. That gave us the opportunity then to reinvest in the squad, and then we gradually grew from there. We did go full time. It was more of a hybrid sort of, a combination of part-time players and full-time players who we were training in a full-time model. But it grew, and it improved. And when we needed the certain players at the right time, they came along. And when we went on ultimately to topple TNS, which is an incredible achievement, considering the financial input that's putting into that club to be successful. It's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times what everybody else in the league is. So to actually conquer them was a great achievement.
Yeah. And which road did you go down, Andy, as the gaffer there? Did you go down the youth route, or did you call on your decades of experience in the Football League and bring in experienced pros? How did that go?
Well, it was because of being part-time, it's hard to bring through youngsters. The gulf between what's needed and what was available is huge. And, if you can find one, I guess that goes for any club. I think if you can find one, when over a season that'll break into your first team, that's a bonus. And we did. But it was basically structured around good ex-professional footballers who had moved into work, moved away from the full-time game. And we built it from that. And then when we did go full-time, we managed to bring in players and we developed them. And, when a couple of them went on into the Football League.
Yeah. I was chatting to a mate of yours, Andy Payton, about life after football. And he tried the non-league management route. And one of the struggles he had, Andy, was that he was just like the caliber and the quality just wasn't what he was used to. And he found it difficult. Was there any of that for you, or were you...
Well, it's a difficulty that I think anybody's going to have. But I was an assistant manager, for a period of time, and that's where my attention is, and that's where my work has to be done. I then went on to manage, and that's where my work is. If you're always looking for something else, you take your eye off what you're doing. And my job was to manage Connah's Quay on a daily basis, and I give my attention to that. And whatever comes on the back of that, so be it. But you're dealing with what you've got, and I hear Andy. But if that's what you're dealing with, then you get the best out of what you've got, and you find a way to not just win games of football, to improve people, and make a difference to them. Because if you've got good men and you've got good principles and good morals, you'll win games of football. It's a byproduct of all those things, and we managed to create that over a long period of time. And we had an incredibly strong group of men back then, went and won games of football.
And during that time, Andy, where there was quite a lot of success, did calls come from the English Football League,
Oh,
or not? And if not, why do you think that never happened?
Well, I think it's a bit of a bubble over there. We did some amazing things. Maybe self-promotion. Maybe I wasn't out there, chucking my name around, but like I say, my attention was there. My commitment was to that football club, and I did that on a daily basis. And would I change it? No, I wouldn't. We won games of football. We beat Norwegian teams, full-time teams. We beat the Finnish champions, Helsinki. We beat Kilmarnock. We had some incredible victories. We beat the Kosovan champions. It looks a success, which it was, but it's very, very difficult to actually break into the English system from the Welsh. It's been proven to be very, very difficult. And I enjoyed what I was doing. I was loving my job. We were being successful. There was so many good things in place that, I wasn't itching to get out. I wanted to do that and do it to the best I could.
And ultimately, Andy, you're one of the few managers that I can think of that actually made the decision to step away, aren't you?
Yeah.
Rather than get the bullet, you actually.
I don't think I would have got. Like I say, we won back-to-back titles, and on a personal level, I got which I always wanted. I always wanted to win manager of the season, but we started the following season, and I just had a moment in a game where, you kind of like, I need to step away from this. I need to not refresh and reinvent myself, but I just need a break from it, because with the European football, it's a 50-week season. If you're in Europe in the Welsh League, you finish, say, end of May, you have 2 weeks off, and then you're back mid-June to start because you come in at the beginning of July. So there is no break. So it is relentless. So, I needed to step away for a bit and look at things. And, I went and visited I made many good contacts in the game, and I went to so many football clubs, and I looked at what they were doing, seeing if anybody's reinventing the wheel, and they weren't. It was football as we know it, and more sports science, more statistics. But, football's football. And I never saw anything. I never had a eureka moment where I thought, wow, look at what they're doing. I need to do that. We were doing all the right things.
Yeah. And this is of course, is the more recent past. I love chatting to footballers about the beginning of their careers, Andy. Trevor Stephen came on, and I'm a big Burnley fan, and he was talking about some of the old names that brought him through. Who were the guys that were there? I guess you're probably role model to a lot of young guys during your time in Wales. Who were your kind of mentors when you started out that you took the real inspiration from?
Yeah, I was very lucky. I came off the fishing boats. Like I said it many times in my autobiography. My last year in school, I had 15 days attendance. I was either working on my father's boat, or I was playing football, or I wasn't at school. It was simple as that. So I went into an environment of discipline within a football structure, and I had good people, really, really good people. Dave Smith, the manager, who actually got a connection with Burnley. And Malcolm Musgrove, these were good people who were our coaches at that time, and they directed me. Also, some older professionals that were, like I say, I find that what you need, if you're open and your intentions are right, the right people come along, and I had the right people in my life early, especially in them early days where, like I say, I walked off the back streets of Union Street in Plymouth, out of a tenement flats, into that environment, and it was, with no real discipline, life discipline, apart from I loved football and I wanted to be a professional footballer. Yeah. So that held me in good stead, and I made a lot of mistakes along the way, but I think they were honest mistakes.
Yeah. Do you remember the day you got your first professional contract, Andy? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Dave Smith. I think I was just finished my YTS, and they offered me Dave Smith brought me in and offered me a contract, and I think it was £40 a week, and an extra tenner for the second year, and yeah, and it was you know, it was one of the proudest moments of my life, because I wanted to be a professional footballer, and I wanted to play football for Plymouth Argyle, and to do that, and you saw lads that were let go, and then you get kept on, and incredibly proud, and then went on to make my debut at Aston Villa Park at 17. Again, was a huge game, a huge occasion for me, because that's what I'd visualised as a child, was coming through as a Plymouth schoolboy, was playing for Plymouth, making my debut, and then I went on. I scored the winner against Ipswich, which was one of my dreams, to score at home park, and it was the winning goal against Ipswich. So I achieved so much of what I'd actually visualised. I don't, I think about it now, and I've had this conversation many times. I don't think I dreamt big enough. I think my dreams were, and I think I achieved my dreams, and I didn't dream bigger than that, and I don't know why that is, whether it was expectations or where I thought I could actually go, but everything that I dreamt about, and saw in my mind's eye, I achieved.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I was thinking about, your struggles with mental health were documented in your autobiography. I was wondering if your this might sound a strange question, I hope it doesn't, whether your mental health issues made you a better footballer, or actually they did stop you from reaching the next level, as it were, to reaching the not that you didn't reach the top level. You played in the Premiership, but on a very on a more consistent and a period of longevity.
Yeah, it's a valid question, and in many ways, Alex, I think with the problems that I had, I think I climbed mountains to do what I did. But then I also hugely underachieved with the talent that I had and the ability that I had. I went to Blackburn at 21, for £500,000 to Kent with Kenny Dalglish was the manager. I was a talented, but I wasn't emotionally ready to deal with the pressures of all that. And I don't. There's no regret whatsoever about the journey. Nietzsche talks about amor fati, which is, it's your journey, it's your gift, and I don't ever look back and think, oh, I wish I'd done or this. No, it's not. It's a gift, your journey to where you are today, and I wouldn't change anything from it, because it created my pathway, but it was incredibly challenging. Whatever said and done, it was challenging along the way, and when I found I needed to escape from the reality of life, and I did that with alcohol for a long period of time, until I'm now 24 years since I last had a drink of alcohol. And the last 28, and but I hid in that because I needed that crutch to get through life.
I'll come to that in a second, Andy. I'm just curious to ask. Now in football, the top clubs especially have got departments for everything, haven't they? You name it, there's a department for it. When you just talked about your time at Blackburn, were people telling you that you weren't making the most of your ability, or was this a perpetual kind of self-doubt in your own mind? I can do better, or were you being reminded of that on a daily basis by the coaches around you?
No, I don't think so, because you're wrapped up in it. You're in the training. You're in. It's almost institutionalized in many ways, because your whole life is structured. Only when you look back, when I think back about the pressure and the fear and the worry that I actually had around football, and I didn't have the emotional intelligence, if you want to use the word intelligence, to actually deal with it and understand, because those qualities are things that you build through your young years. You get disappointment at school, you come up with things, you get challenges, and you deal with them. I never dealt with anything, because for one, I wasn't at school, and the life that we led, it didn't open up those learning strategies. So when I first came to massive pressure, and expectations at 22, I didn't really. Well, I mean, I was playing at 17, 18, 19, 20, but I was always playing in my comfort zone, because I was more than comfy at that level. But when I stepped up and the pressure was on, I didn't really have. I had physical resilience, but I didn't have mental resilience to be able to deal with the pressure I am under today going into this game. And that's something I'm incredibly aware of now today.
When did you realize you had a problem with the drink before somebody else did?
No, not really. Again, now, hindsight being the perfect vision, it's pretty obvious. When you're 18 years of age and the players are going for a drink in the afternoon, the staff, and you're one of the younger lads, and you ask for a Coke, and they ask why. We've heard you like a drink, and well, what's the point in having a? If I can't get pissed, what's the point in having a drink? So I may as well just have a Coke. So that you don't 18-year-olds don't think like that, and that pattern was already there earlier, very early on, and within a short period of time, I'd say by the age of 19, all I ever drank for was to just get completely. I'm not going out to have a drink. I'm going out to get complete oblivion, and I don't think that's normal, But I didn't realize it at the time because of kind of parts of my upbringing, what things that I saw and what I thought was a norm. It felt that way that this is what men do. They drink, they fight, they end up in jail, they end up at home, they end up in hospital. That's what happens. And I did it many times. And like I say, looking back now, it's like, wow, why didn't you see it, or why didn't anybody else? But I wouldn't have listened to them anyway.
It's quite interesting, I think, because when people normally associate top footballers who've had a bit of a crash in their lives, it's often been towards the end of the career. Thinking of people like Gaza, Paul Stewart, who came on the Godcast, who talked about his, came out and talked about his problems after his career was over, and that crash of not having that security of a football team and a club. But yours was, early doors, wasn't it? You were drinking young, and so when did somebody actually intervene? What was the kind of the big crescendo moment in all this, Andy? Was it after the game had finished?
No, I mean, listen, like I say, I'm not saying anything new. It's stuff I spoke about openly in my book. When I had numerous court cases, serious violence, where I was, looking at like anything up to 10 years if I was found guilty. You'd think that would be the eye opener. You'd think that would be the, you need to look at this, but it was never. It was always, I'm not going to get involved in that. I'm not going to get. It wasn't never. I'm not going to have a drink. That was out of the question, because it's not about that. But it's every time I messed up, I wasn't drunk. Every time I did mess up, I was drunk. If that makes sense. Like, and because I had many times where I was drunk, but didn't end up in trouble. But when the trouble came along, it was always on the back of me being drunk. And and like I say, the penny just didn't drop. It really didn't. And whether that's ignorance or, I think it was I think from large parts of it, it was a complete lack of understanding of what actually alcoholism is. When I have an acute understanding of what it is now, and I didn't at that point. I had nowhere to go or turn with it until I actually did sort of surrender on that one day when I've had enough now. This is me done. I have options here. I either take my own life or I try and get help, and thankfully I got help.
It feels really pertinent talking about this with a guy who used to play for Blackpool as well, after what's happened there against my beloved club Burnley, and the consequences of violence, and obviously not knowing what's happened. But it is terribly sad, isn't it, that these things come out of often drink fueled issues. How close were you to actually being sent down then, Andy? What?
Well, I was a jury decision, guilty or not guilty. As simple as that. When I mean, many things phasing me in my life, and people have said that I've captained every club I've ever played for, and I'm a leader, and and people have said, oh, he's fearless. But I'll tell you what fear is. Fear is waiting on a jury to come back, and when you're sat there with your family and they say guilty or not guilty, because if it's guilty, you're going there. Then you're gone for a minimum of 6 years, and that's your career over, and in many ways your life over. But the facts of the whole incident, and there was 3 major incidents in my playing career. They were all self-defense. They were excessive, but they were self-defense. And, and thankfully the jury saw that, that you have to defend yourself. And I'm sure many of the people on the jury would have said, well, you didn't need to go to that excess. But, you're in an environment where you've got to defend yourself, and it's in your nature, how much force you use. And I guess eventually, they came to the conclusion that I used the correct force, but it still put me in a position, where a Section 18 with malicious wounding with intent, that you're going to go to jail for between 4 and 10 years.
And as you look back on those incidents, Andy, are you just grateful that you didn't go down? Do you feel, do you carry any guilt with you? Do you seek forgiveness of those you inflicted the hurt upon? How do you work that through?
Well, I don't. Would I do it differently now? Yes, 100%. Do I regret? No, I don't. And I'm sincere in that. I don't regret. If I had the same choices again, I would make different decisions. But like I said, it was my path. It's who I was at them given times. And I don't think you should ever look back on anything you did if it was part of your journey and it was an honest mistake. You shouldn't look back with regret or shame on anything you've done, because it was your journey.
Yeah, and this was all going on while you were a professional footballer, and you're playing for one of the biggest clubs who now in world football, perhaps not at that time. I know you've talked about the influence of Joe Royle. Just tell us about your relationship with him, Andy, as a gaffer.
Well, like I say, I think when the pupil's ready, I think the teachers appear. And, I had Willie Donaghy and Joe Royle, who were in my life at that point. I had a fallout with the manager at Huddersfield. I was right to fall out with him as well. And did I fall out with him in the right way? No. Would I advocate doing to any young player what I did? I would say, no, don't do that. But it got me out of that club at that point. And I loved my time at Huddersfield. I was a captain at the club, but I had a fallout with the manager. I went to Manchester City, and straight away, my conversations with Willie Donaghy, who's, who thinks outside the box, very philosophical man, played for Burnley as well. He played a huge part as well with Willie, and I'd got myself into a mess again. Where I'd done all the right things and trained right, conducted myself in the right way, and then I deserved a drink. I went for a drink and got myself into all sorts of trouble again. And I expected to have the book thrown at me, captaincy taken off me, blah, 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 fined, shamed or whatever. It wasn't like that, but I think I was ready at that point to listen to what was said. And, Joe said to me when I started the apology, he said, like, you don't need to apologize. He said, you're not the first person who's let me down, and you won't be the last. He said, but what about you? What about your life? And I'd never looked at it. I mean, I was just a commodity. I was just a footballer, and while I was sort of used to Plymouth Argyle or Blackpool or Blackburn, and I was worth £500,000, they're looking after me. If I wasn't worth anything to them, they would have sacked me and got rid of me. That's the football life, and that is life. And it wasn't about that, Joe sort of said, what you could have achieved in the game and what you can still achieve in the game. Surely you deserve more than that, than what you're, waking up in police cells. Surely you're better. You're not better than that. It wasn't like that. It was surely you're worth more than that.
Yeah.
And it left a massive impression on me. And I went away and thought, yeah, do you know what? I need to do something now. And I did. I did what I needed to do at that point, and I followed that through on a daily basis since that day. In that was beginning of February '99.
It's a fine line, isn't it, between you're better than that and you're worth more than that. I think it's got a very, really clever distinction by Joe Royle there. This is not about how, being a better person. It's about being the best of yourself, isn't it? And I think it's quite wise. And so the recovery began, and you engaged in this incredible relationship with Manchester City and the fans. Although I was interested to know you didn't. I mean, have you had something like 30 operations, Andy, in your career? Is that right?
Yeah, well, I've had up to date, I've had like 15 operations on my left knee, and 3 or 4 on my right knee, and my ankles and my back, and and all byproduct of my football. Again, being unprofessional in many ways, and the time, the period in football was different then. It was all about the challenge. It was all about getting back as quick as you can. If you can't get back, get it injected, get back out on the pitch. And that's what men did. And that's what you thought was expected of you. So it was never, I don't want to do this and I'm being forced. it was a challenge to me. I remember reading, I think it was Ali McCoy had a knee operation, and he was back in. It was a different operation, but because it was a cartilage operation, I thought that what I had, but it was a bit more. And I was back out running within 10 days, and he can do it, I can do it, and I need the challenge. Like nowadays, the period and the recovery is so different because, of course, science and understanding of the body is greater. But back then, I had my knee drained at half time in the playoff final, and I had a painkilling injection before the game because that's what you did. You didn't know any different. I was at Blackpool where we had the playoffs against Bradford, and I had a broken toe, my big toe, but I literally hobbled in on crutches. They injected it in 4 places. I played the game, fine, finished the game, and then 2 hours later, you're back on the crutches. That's what was expected of, I suppose your captain. It's got to just go and get it done, get on with it, but you wouldn't do that now, and we know why, because further down the line, you're going to be on a cold day like today. You're going to be wake up and hobbling into the bathroom like I am.
I'm going to say that's exactly what happened this morning. Is yeah. Andy, and this turnaround in your approach to your lifestyle against the backdrop of Man City being in the second division, the old second division, as it were. That's right, isn't it? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Was that a positive for you? I mean, for everybody looking at Man City, this was the worst case possible scenario, wasn't it? Not only were Man City no longer in the Premier League, they'd gone from Division 1 and dropped down again, and they were in this kind of no man's league, really, for a club of Man City's side. But I remember that period. I remember still 30,000 turning up. I presume it was at Main Road then. Although it appeared quite a dark time for the club, I guess it was quite a positive time for you as the skipper.
100%. Listen, if the club had been wealthy and the club had money, they wouldn't have signed me. As simple as that. The timing was perfect. The tide was always going to turn at some point, and it coincided with me being there. But there were so many good things there: an exceptional manager, coaches, good players, young players. But they'd had a really tough time, and and like I say, the timing was right, and we went on a run, and we had back-to-back promotions. We obviously got out of that league, but the momentum going into the following season, we kicked on again, and like I say, the club were never going to stay down there. It was always going to kick on, and the timing was right for me and everything in my life at that point. Listen, I go to the games now. I'm still an ambassador. I go, I still work for the club in capacity of working for the City TV and the social media side of things. And that's a byproduct of that period. But Manchester City gave me so much more than what I gave them. Where I was in my life at that point. And where I was going. And I never underestimate the part that the whole club played, in my recovery, as well as me getting back to where I should be in life and where I am today. So it was definitely a two-way relationship.
Yeah. Andy, a friend of mine is Jamie Hoyland, and I'd asked him if your paths had crossed, and he said we'd played a few times, and he described you as the hardest player he'd ever played against. And and he also said that you were a nutter, but you were fair with it. And he said, particularly alongside Gary Brabbin at Blackpool. I was wondering where you felt, if we planted you back into the football pyramid now, where do you feel your ability and level would be? Do you think you could cut it in the Prem? Or...
I'm always going to talk more fondly than probably what's the truth. But listen, as a holding midfielder, Sam Allardyce put me into midfield when I was at my leanest and my fittest. And I played for David Kemp at Plymouth. And I played over 100 games as a holding midfielder. And at my very, very best and at my leanest, I could have held my own in the Premier League as a holding midfielder. Don't think I could have been a centre-half. Maybe with the way the teams are structured nowadays, it would have been a bit more easy because you don't get exposed like you did when I played. When I was at Blackburn and I played a few games, you were hopelessly exposed because it was so wide open. But the way teams are set up now and the way you drop into units and, you might get exposed once or twice in a game, but there's something wrong. You're either chasing on badly at the end of a game if you're going to keep getting exposed. But so as a holding midfielder, I'd say I'd say no. When interesting, you talk about a hard man. I always like to ask somebody when they say that. I just say, well, just tell me what a hard man was. Because my perception of a hard man is probably different. Are we talking on the field? Are we talking on the street, on the cobbles, which I grew up on? What are we talking about when we say a hard man? Because I think I was incredibly competitive and fair. But, I certainly had a wild streak, that's for sure. But I was brought up, like I say, on the back of Union Street, and it was the Wild West in the 80s during my teenage years. It was just like, it was dog eat dog and live by the sword, die by the sword. And that was the way I was brought up. And probably carried that into my football, probably a little bit too much at times.
Andy, I've absolutely loved chatting football to you. I can't let you go without, just looking at some of your clubs. They're a bit, you've got Rovers fighting it out at the top, and you've got Huddersfield and Blackpool in the bottom three, looking like they're doomed, and City are hot on the heels of Arsenal. Just a quick word on some. I mean, City for starters. Do you think they're gonna catch Arsenal and take the trophy?
I hope they do, but I think it's going to be a lot tougher than what people think. I was so impressed with Arsenal when they came in the cup. Not a few weeks ago. I was so impressed with them when City beat them 3-1 when they had a 64% possession and more chances created. And perhaps if the chances had fallen to Haaland instead of Nketiah, the result might have been different. So they are the real deal. They're definitely a team, and it is I think they're favourites at this moment in time, Arsenal, to win the league. Burnley are going to run away with it. And that's because they're set up to play, they're set up to fight, they're set up to be strong, they're set up to intimidate. Every quality that you need to be a successful team, they have it. But the question will be asked when they go up, because the gulf is huge. Blackpool it's a tough one. Huddersfield, they're in a tough position, but if you want to call on experience, if experience keeps you up, then Mick McCarthy and Neil Warnock, they'll finish mid-table, the pair of them.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see that journey. And obviously, my first club, Plymouth Argyle, which is my love, is the team that I grew up supporting. They're in a very strong position, and that looks like 2 from 3 to go up in that league.
Why have they? Just on Plymouth, Andy? Why have they never kind of been a consistent Championship club? Because they're a big club, aren't they? They've got a huge fan base. What's been the?
I think the financial input, the main benefactor of real significance. They've had people that have been good people who have invested, but that extra level, and I know Burnley and I know Bournemouth, but they seem to get there organically, and then they built from there, and then you have the parachutes and you have the years, that Sean Dyche kept Burnley in, and then that creates a wealth in itself. But getting there is the problem, when Plymouth went out of business not so long ago because of really expending themselves, and it didn't work, and left themselves in, they went down the leagues, and but they're back now, and I think you just run into big clubs, once you start running into Sunderland, Portsmouth, Derby, in that division, it's huge clubs, and you're competing against, and it comes down to your recruitment, it comes down to your quality of signings, and ultimately it comes down to who can afford to bring in the better players. And I'm afraid that's the crux of it at all levels of football. The top teams are paying the most money, and that's to break into that, you need something different.
Yeah, and just finally on Burnley and Man City. I mean, in recent years in the Premier League, Burnley have been a bit of a whipping boys for City.
I scored twice against Burnley, by the way.
Okay. Yeah, I did notice that actually. I wasn't going to mention that, I've dreaded going to the Etihad in recent seasons because it's been 4-5, I think 6-0 on one occasion. But do you know what, Andy? I actually think Burnley are going to come in the quarterfinal of the Cup and are going to try and take the game to City, which is not something City are used to. Vincent Kompany's got a model of football that is Pep all over it, and I've never seen football like it at Turf Moor. Do you think it'll be quite a close game?
Yeah, you don't know. I mean, I've seen some exceptional teams, much better teams than Burnley, come to Manchester City and get torn to shreds. Last season, Newcastle under Bielsa 7-0. It can go horribly against you, but City will have to do their stuff, but if they're at their very best and they're fluent in what they do, then it's going to be incredibly difficult for Burnley. But football doesn't always work that way. And the romantic side of Vinny going back to the stadium and the reception that he'll get, will be magical. But there'll be two managers, Pep and Vinny, and they both want to win a game of football. They'll both be trying their best, and they'll be organised and disciplined, and they'll come up with a way. And I don't think Vinny's naive enough to think that he can go there and play the way he does against against a Blackpool or a Huddersfield, because he knows that he's not going to have possession of the ball for long periods of the game, and how he structures that will be down to his own, personal identity.
Yeah, and I could keep going with questions. I've got one last question. Could you see yourself managing in the Football League, Andy, if the right opportunity comes along?
Let's see what happens. I'm focused on what I'm doing. My full attention is there in what I'm doing. And whatever the universe has got planned for me, I'm sure it'll show its hand in time.
Yeah. And Andy, I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you. I love reminiscing about football. You're an intriguing guy. I'm delighted that you're well and things are going well. And just thanks so much for coming on the Godcast. I really appreciate it.
Been a pleasure. Thank you very much. See you again, Alex. Cheers.